Okay, I am back for week 3 of August, this next week's recent reads, week 3 of the amazing readathon. We finished out the last weekend with the face-off, trying to read shorter books. I didn't read as many of them, and at that point I was in the middle of reading one book, which I'm going to talk about first. And then as we get through this week, because of the particular book that I chose for the prompt, I'm actually still not done with that book that I started on Monday. But I have read 4 other books. It has just taken me longer to get through these. So let's start off with the first book that I read this week. Most of the books, 3 out of the 4 books that I finished this week, were on audiobook. So let's start with Lies We Sing to the Sea. I am really bummed because this book is gorgeous. However, I knew going into it that there was a little bit of a controversy about this book. This book, in some descriptions, has been described as a retelling of the Odyssey. That is not actually correct. This is inspired by the Odyssey and set many generations after the events of the Odyssey. But the controversy is that the author revealed in an interview that she has never read the Odyssey. And I don't even think she's read any like Percy Jackson books or anything. And so a lot of people are like, how are you going about writing a book based on things from the Odyssey? And you haven't read the Odyssey. I think after reading this book, it's almost blatantly obvious that she's never read any Greek myths or done any study on Greek myths. Because this was supposed to be centered on Greek mythology. Aside from a few references and names, nope, not a hint of Greek mythology retelling in this book, even though it claims to be, which is a problem. There's a lot of this that was very lyrically good and engaging, but the plot was incredibly confusing. So to start this off, it's based on the idea that when Odysseus returned, he killed all of the suitors who had been trying to take his wife away from him in the 10 years that he was gone. And he also killed the 12 maidens that the suitors had ravished, basically, which is not fair to them. But there's a lot in Greek myths that punishes the victims of SA. It's based on that, and so because of that, now Poseidon has a curse on Ithaca, and every year they have to sacrifice 12 maidens who have some sort of mark appear, I think on their neck, I don't remember. Has to sacrifice them every year to Poseidon, otherwise things are going to go really bad for Ithaca. And the main character at the start of this is one of those maidens. She ends up with this mark, she tries to run away, but she is sacrificed to Poseidon. Lo and behold, she dies, yet she doesn't. She awakens and she has some source of power and she can go back and avenge. And the only way to end this curse is by killing the Prince of Ithaca, who is another one of the perspectives in here. It gets to a point where you're like, oh no, what are they going to be able to do? It gets to that point, like that far into the book, and there's this much left. And the way that the plot twisted in and contorted itself to try to make it a decent plot, I'm just like, you're doing what with this? Why? What? Oh, good grief, that's ridiculous. And there's also so much romance in here. This is like similar to the idea of Fourth Wing being made a fantasy so you can have the romance. This is a Greek myth retelling, or inspired Greek myths, inspired by, I should say, just so you can have the romance. It's sort of a love triangle, but also sort of polyamory, sort of, but not really. And then you get to the end, and I listened to the end of it and went, that is ridiculous. This book did so many stupid things. I just was listening just to finish it, to get the points for it, because I'm counting this as yellow because I'm on team yellow. I'm not going to be keeping it, which is such a bummer because you saw those sprayed edges. It's gorgeous. I can't talk about this book anymore because it is so ridiculous. The next book that I read on audiobook is The Curse of Saints by Kate Dramas, and this is my Fairy Loot Adult. I don't like this cover particularly. I actually like the other cover, the original cover where it was redesigned. This book had some really interesting ideas set up. So I won't get into the backstory of how the magic came into this world, but basically there are humans who don't have powers, and then because I listened to this on audiobook, I don't remember what the people with powers are called, but they constantly refer to the others as human, although they're basically the same, just one has powers and the other doesn't, and they're based on certain elements and they're supposed to have only one. There are people who have fought against this and have sort of corrupted it to try to get more, and they're evil, and there was this big battle originally. It was ended by this one, what they call a saint. And supposedly there is a prophecy that also predicts the rise of a second saint, which you can kind of see it's going to be the main character, Aya. One thing I thought was interesting and is a first for me is this is basically enemies to lovers, but I think done well at first. It almost hit the mark because throughout the beginning, the two main characters that you are sure are going to be the love interest, they seem to genuinely hate each other. And it's building and building, and you can see attraction, but they still hate each other, and it seems like for genuine reasons. And then it gets to a point and it just shifts where they are head over heels in love with each other, and it's trying to like explain why they hated each other in the beginning, but it sort of makes them never enemies in the first place. It was a really interesting twist there, and I don't know whether I like that or not. And then there was a betrayal at the end that I went, oh, you went there. But then that betrayal got a twist to it, and I'm like, how can you believe that? I don't understand what's going on here. And so overall, this was not a bad read. This was not an excellent read. I wasn't turned off by any part of it, like Lies We Sing to the Sea. I also really wasn't drawn in. If this had been a physical book, I wouldn't necessarily have gone back to it and picked it up. But because it was audiobook, it was easier to listen and get through. I think I have put it through Call-Pile, but I don't remember what the score was. This is probably a 4-star. Might be a 3.5, but probably a 4. I'm not really sure yet, and I don't know whether or not I'm going to unhaul it or whether I would be interested in reading the sequel. Then we come to a book that I have no doubts about where I stand on it, and that is Shield Maiden by Sharon Emmerich. Shield Maiden is set up so it does also fulfill a magical readathon prompt to have Shield on the cover or in the title. This is set up in the time of Beowulf and towards the end of Beowulf's life. Like, he's done all these things. He's fought Grendel, he's fought Grendel's mother. The main character in here is not Beowulf. This is retelling a part of the story that I'm not as familiar with, where Beowulf goes up against a dragon. The main character in here, Freya, when she was 13, she's always wanted to be a shield maiden. When she was 13, she was chasing a wolf. She was going to kill the wolf, bring it back to her father, who is the leader of this burr and related in some fashion to Beowulf. And there was a massive earthquake, which I think is established is because of the dragon. But you don't find that out until later, I think. I don't remember for sure. But there's this massive earthquake where this giant crevice opens up basically where she is standing. And so she starts to fall huge distance, and she's trying to save herself and ends up wedging her hand into this cleft in a rock. It stops her momentum. It basically saves her life, but it utterly ruins her hand. And she's there for hours before she's rescued. And so her dream of becoming a shield maiden seems to have ended. And it picks back up when she and her twin brother, who's going to be the leader after their father dies, are 20. They are going to be hosting Beowulf for the anniversary of 50 years of his reign. And there's also a couple other characters mentioned in here. There's Hild, who is an indentured servant, who I believe is of African descent. But she's had multiple years added on to her indenture because her parents died when she was young. And so the Lord, Freya's father, adds on the years for taking care of her. And then you also have Theo, who it sounds like a name, but it's spelled Theow. And apparently that was the word for slave. And he was purchased as a slave when he was a child. He was ripped away from his home. I think he's Irish. This is in very, very early medieval England, like 800s-ish. Obviously, Theo is going to be the love interest for Freya. And lots of things happen throughout this book. I'm not going to narrate through it, but it is intense. It moves quickly. A lot is packed into a span of only a few days. Her brother is such an interesting character. He has always wanted the love of their father, but he's never been the type of person to do the sort of warrior things that their father did and had renowned for, fighting with Beowulf. He sees all the admiration put on Freya and doesn't like the misdirection there. And his father doesn't think much of him. And so he feels like Freya is his other half. Like, he's not a complete person without her, and he's incredibly possessive, and their father has done some not so great things after the death of their mother, because their mother died giving birth to them. Theo is the kind of person who does not deal well. Not Theo, excuse me. The brother is the kind of person that does not deal well with these sorts of things and ends up turning to drink and like poppy drugs. He becomes a very twisted person. A lot of people would be like, oh, he's too villainous. He's like the mwahahaha sort of villain. He's not. He's very twisted in his thinking, and it shows just how difficult it is to try to conquer that sort of twisted thinking when that person is so far gone that they will not listen to reason, and then they take it and they twist it and they gaslight themselves, much less that they also gaslight other people. I thought that was a fascinating study in there, and I adored all of the references to Beowulf, which is one of the first things that I studied in depth in college in one of my literature classes, because I took the first half of British literature. And so you're going to study Beowulf, because it's one of the first works of basically Old English. It's very difficult to read, but I love that. The setting has always been something that has appealed to me, and this book was so engaging. I could not get enough of this. I adore this book. It is fascinating character studies on multiple levels. It is brutal. It is fast-paced. It is emotional. I haven't put it through Copilot yet, but I'm almost certain it's going to get 5 stars. I did not get any 5 stars in the month of July. I think I am at now 3 talking about Shield Maiden, because it has escaped me. I literally was just looking at this. I forget what the first one is, but the second one is Warrior Girl Unearthed. I had 0 in July, only 2 in June. But now I think I've gotten a 4th. And that is Killers of the Flower Moon. I knew that I would be interested in this. I picked it up this month because I needed another nonfiction. I needed a book of the month book. And it fit a prompt for Magical Readathon. I forget which one at the time. This is a lot shorter than I expected, but I've heard really good things about the author, David Grann, his writing style, his dedication to research. This book gripped me. It told a story about devastating series of events, something called the Reign of Terror in Osage County in Oklahoma in the 1920s, where the Osage people had gotten allotments. Like, they had been continually mistreated, like most Native Americans. But they'd gotten these allotments in what was formerly known as Indian Country, Oklahoma. And then after they had gotten them, oil was discovered on their land. And this was an oil boom. And suddenly these Indians were worth so much money. But of course, can they really use that money themselves? No, because it was mandated that they had to have a guardian. These are fully fledged human beings. And because white people think that, oh, we're on top academically and in every way possible, which is patently ridiculous. But because of that, like, they don't know how to manage their money. We need a white person to go take care of it for them. Do you see how this is ripe for abuse? Not only were they exploited, but this sets up this conspiracy with this man who, he says some absolutely despicable things when things are found out. Basically orchestrated a massive conspiracy to consolidate the allotments of this one family into this one person by murdering people. One of these women, Molly Burkhart, the story opens up with her family and the death of her sister, which is the first. It starts this off. By the end of the story, she has lost every single member of her family. Her sisters, her brother-in-law, her mother, one of her young daughters, and her husband. Her husband wasn't killed. Her husband was involved in the killing. And so she is left by the end of the story with 2 family members, her 2 children, with the man who conspired with another man to kill her entire family. This book, it talks about that. It talks about other mysterious and awful things that were happening to the people in this area. And then it goes even deeper and it reveals that these rich white men would get multiple wards. They become guardians of multiple people. And the percentage of those dependents who died while under the care of these rich white people is staggering. The death rate is far beyond what you would expect to normally see. This is a short book. It is not flowery. The writing is very spare, but it's concise and it is to the point. There are so many people talked about in this story, but you're able to keep them straight. You're able to understand the enormity of what was going on in this time, how these people were used and exploited, and how the government investigated and solved the crime and brought justice only when they felt like it, only when it was beneficial for them. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. This might be my #1 nonfiction book of the year. And then just briefly before I end, the book that I am in the middle of, actually just under halfway, and the one that's taken me so long to read, is Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. Don't get me wrong, it's not taken me a long time to read because I don't like it. I love it. I am eating this up. It's a similar concept to the reasons why I love Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, only for slightly different reasons. They're not written the same. M.A. Carrick is actually an author duo, and this gets me excited to jump into another series by one of the authors, Marie Brennan. Marie Brennan? I think that's her name. Mask of Mirrors is set in a vaguely Venetian-inspired fantasy world. And this book is slow. It is all about the con and the politics and the world building, and I am eating it up. It's delicious to read these pages. I don't want to read them quickly, which is why it's taken me so long to get through this book. I hope to finish it within the next few days. I hope to spend a good chunk of time today reading it to finish it so I can get on to another book, because as much as I love this book, I still have several books on my TBR left to read. But so far, I have had wins with every single series I've started this year. So there you go. We have one book, one I don't know how I feel about this book, 2 amazing books that I finished, and 1 amazing book that I'm in the middle of. Overall, I'd say this week is a win. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.